All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the June MineWatch community meeting. That's about the proposed reopening of the Idaho Maryland mine in Grass Valley. My name is Stephanie Wells, and I'm a community member and volunteer. And now I'm going to pass it over to Greg Thrush from the Sierra Fund to moderate this evening's discussion.
Welcome, everyone. I'm glad to see so many people on the call tonight, and I trust that you will hear some good information this evening. As Stephanie mentioned, this meeting is being hosted by the Community Environmental Advocates Foundation. CEA is a local community group that advocates for responsible land use and environmental protection policies and actions in Nevada County. One of the projects that CEA works on is the proposed reopening of the Idaho Maryland mine, and that's the reason why everyone is here tonight. So thanks again for joining us. And tonight's presentation is entitled Precious Headwaters, Potential Impacts of the Idaho Maryland Mine to Plants, Animals, and Aquatic Habitats of the Wolf Creek Watershed. And this is the next in a series of education events that we've had, that CEA has had about the implications of reopening the Idaho Maryland mine. CEA holds these meetings once a month and presents special speakers. And tonight, Gary Griffith and Gene Wilson are joining us, and they're going to talk to us in depth about the watershed, the Wolf Creek watershed, and about the biota of Wolf Creek. And so tonight, we hope that the meeting does three things: provide some in-depth information that relates to the Idaho Maryland mine, allow people to ask questions of the panelists and CEA members, and to learn how to take action to influence the decision makers to oppose this mine opening. And so before we launch into the presentations, let me introduce the panelists. Gary Griffith is a retired educator and has been a volunteer monitor with the Wolf Creek Community Alliance for many years. Gene Wilson is the president of the Redbud chapter of the California Native Plant Society. Josie Crawford is joining us as well as a panelist, and she is the executive director of the Wolf Creek Community Alliance. She started as a creek monitor with her husband, Dale Peterson, in 2005, and she lives on Wolf Creek, and her training is in biology and botany. Ralph Sieberston is the president of CEA Foundation and is here with us. Tracy Sheehan is a coordinator of our project, this mine project, and will talk to us a little bit later about actions we can take to help our efforts to oppose the mine. And then myself, my name is Greg Thrush. I am a community organizer for the Sierra Fund, and I am a CEA volunteer. I live in downtown Grass Valley have for the last 15 years. The Sierra Fund works on issues related to mining's legacy in the Sierra Nevada, which includes remediating the contamination from historic mining operations in this area. And I'm going to put a link into what we do as well. Without further ado, let me give you just a quick outline. Gary is going to start the presentation and talk for a while, and then Gene will follow, and then Tracy will give us some action ideas, and then we'll wrap up. Everyone has the ability to, because this is a webinar, we use the Q&A. Does everyone see the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen? This is the place for asking questions. So please note that when you open the Q&A box, sometimes it pops right in the middle of the screen. You just drag it over to the side, you can see everything. If you want to ask a question, that is a great place. That is the place to do it. And we will answer them. Either online, we'll answer you back, or we will ask them to one of the panelists if it seems appropriate. Okay, so without further ado, I'd like to introduce Gary Griffith. Gary was a teacher at the Nevada School for the Arts and is a longtime volunteer, like I said, with Wolf Creek Community Alliance, and he is going to start out to tell us about Wolf Creek. Gary, it's all yours.
Let's go to the next slide. So welcome, everyone. Gene Wilson and I are excited to share with you the importance of the Wolf Creek headwaters. Wherever you are, we're all connected, and we're all impacted by the health of our watersheds. So I have the longer part of this presentation because I'm going to talk about the headwaters itself and touch upon hydrology before I deal with aquatic ecosystems and birds. So let's get started. So CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, is the act that deals with impacts on projects, and it looks at potential impacts and how to mitigate them. Its impacts are broken into parts. Biological resources is one of 13 of these parts, and it's mostly focused on species of concern, threatened or endangered. Next slide. But protecting endangered species in itself is not enough. Scientists now look increasingly for a broader watershed approach, one that deals with groups of species, whole habitats, ecosystems. So we propose to look at mine impacts, not just on individual species, as might be in a biological resources document, but looking at the greater whole, the Wolf Creek headwaters. So the headwaters is the top of the Wolf Creek watershed, and a healthy watershed's really important. It's important because it promotes water quality and storage, reduces erosion and flooding, provides sustained dry season flows, recycles nutrients, improves air quality, sequesters greenhouse gases, reduces excess heat, and maybe most importantly, increases resilience to climate change. But these benefits depend upon healthy streams and thriving native plant communities. Okay. Rice Gold's plan is to develop two sites, the Brunswick site for mining, the Centennial site for depositing mine tailings, and then they need to pump water, mine water out of the ground and send it down to local streams. The documents they've submitted so far claim that the land proposed for development is largely degraded. On-site native plant communities are generally of little value, and streams involved will be unaffected. Next slide. We consider the reality to be different. The Centennial and Brunswick sites are actually a home to thriving native plant and animal communities. There are seasonal wetlands, there's marsh, there's a functioning pond. Downstream is vital habitat, as well as a unique meadow that serves as an important refugia for birds. Next slide. So the headwaters itself, if we're living in Grass Valley, then we're living within the headwaters. It has three branches. There's Wolf Creek itself, coming down from Banner Lava Cap, down through Loma Rica into Grass Valley. Below that is the South Fork, which starts up on Loma Rica Ridge with one tributary and another one from Wood Rose, and goes down to through the Meadow, the South Fork Meadow to Grass Valley. And the third part is Little Wolf Creek, starting at Osborne Hill, going through Empire Mine State Historic Park. And there are two important east-west ridges between Crown Point Ridge, Union Hill, Cedar Ridge. So I live in this area just south of the South Fork of Wolf Creek. And so many people I know live in this area as well. Next slide. I want to acknowledge, though, the original inhabitants of this place, the Nisenan, specifically the Nevada City Rancheria Nisenan. They have publicly let it be known that there were at least 4 villages in this headwaters area. And for thousands of years, they managed this landscape to enhance ecosystems, often with the use of fire. And the gift that they left all of us was a full assemblage of species and habitats. Next. Of course, with the gold rush came, in addition to genocide, real alteration of the watershed, stream damage, deforestation, ecosystems being damaged and species disappearing. And we're still dealing with that, including the toxic legacy of what has been left in the soil or in the water. Next. 1957 was an important date in the history of this Headwaters, though, because that is the year that mining stopped. And from that point on, reforestation and stream stabilization could move forward. Nature could heal itself. And gradually, people living here or moving here became interested in conserving and restoring this place. They saw its preciousness and its value. The city, the state, Bear Yuba Land Trust created open space. Organizations like the Wolf Creek Community Alliance, the California Native Plant Society, and so many others have been involved in learning about this precious resource that is the Headwaters and helping to conserve and protect it. Next. Today, though, the reason you're perhaps here is because we're confronted with a new mining proposal, the third since the time that I have lived here. And it asks to start up in the heart of the Headwaters and go on for 80 years. With so many more people calling this place home, with the new challenges we face of drought, wildfire, and climate change, we believe that we cannot afford to return to the destructive impacts of mining. We have to move forward in a different direction, the direction we've been going since the mines closed. Next. So I'm going to focus specifically, primarily on two areas of the South Fork that are both protected as part of Empire Mine State Historic Park. One is a beautiful meadow that was actually part of the original grassy valley that the city of Grass Valley was named after. And it has beautiful meandering stream going through it. The other is a forested section, also protected by the park, has a little steeper gradient, has beautiful pools and riffles, and a wonderful assemblage of mature trees, including the uncommon Pacific yew that you see in its fruiting mode. Next. Hydrology overview. This gets complicated, but here's a nice map showing most of Wolf Creek in its headwaters. There's Grass Valley, and then there's the South Fork. The two creeks are healthy perennial streams in recovery. They've been impacted by past development, but they're now supporting a rich and diverse ecosystems, notably in the meadow and forest reach of the South Fork. Development, particularly the old Brunswick mine, has degraded stream flow at the sources of the South Fork, as you can see, because that red of the Brunswick site is the proposed site, and that matches much of what the old Brunswick site was. But water still flows upstream of that site, and channelization has also impacted the creeks. In fact, if you go down the two forks to the confluence where they join, you find yourself underground underneath the parking lot in Safeway. Historical mine drainage has also been an issue. And so the Magenta drain was an impact, and it required millions of dollars to fix. The North Star mine drainage also was an issue that required litigation and millions of dollars to fix. And so there's been historic mine drainage that has impacted the hydrology. The mine tailings left have also contributed as well. The Empire Mine Surface Encasement Project dealt with toxic waste on the surface of the state park, and it had to be covered so people could safely go on the trails. And there's even where Centennial is a toxic site that the EPA has looked at and suggested as a possible Superfund site that that needs to be cleaned up before Centennial site is developed for this proposed mine. So Wolf Creek Community Alliance's mission in part has been to protect and restore these streams that have been impacted by historic situations, mostly from mining, and the rich habitats that remain, they're precious and they deserve our protection. Okay, next. So the new impact that is proposed that's impacting the South Fork in particular is mine dewatering. On the left is a detail of that first map, and the red dot shows where the mine would be pumping water up. It would go into a treatment pond, and then a pipe would take it down to the point where it would be discharged into the South Fork of Wolf Creek. The map on the other side, the vertical diagram, shows all the mine shafts underneath, and the furthest right vertical line is where the water would be pumped up. Next. So that's kind of the basic hydrology. And there's really two things that we need to concern ourselves with. One is water quality and the other is water flow. Water quality related to mines has to do with heavy metals. Naturally occurring in the rocks are a number of metals, minerals such as arsenic, lead, chromium, asbestos, manganese, iron. And in themselves, they're locked in the rocks typically. And when we break the rocks up and expose them, then that's when we see higher concentrations that are available and dangerous. In 2018, test results from mine drains and the new Brunswick mine shaft were done. And these found high concentrations of arsenic, manganese, and iron in micrograms per liter. So I've summarized this from their report, and you can see for arsenic, the drains that that still exist on Wolf Creek close to the Centennial site are tested at levels up to 59 to 37, and the regulatory limit is 10, so its exceedance is 590%. Manganese, you can see also exceeding the limits by quite a bit, 620%, and iron up to 1,600%. So heavy metals potentially is a big issue for water quality, and any mine would have to do a really good job treating this water. Next. The second issue is the water discharge itself, the volume of water. The water, as I said, would go into a treatment pond, and as Jean will show, that treatment pond in the Brunswick site is a rich habitat for plants and animals and birds, and that would be lost. There'd be a new water detention pond built as well, and then the water from the mine would be sent down the creek for 80 years. The first 6 months, it would be at a rate of 2,500 gallons per minute, or 3.6 million gallons a day. That translates into 5.6 cubic feet per second, which is how we're typically measuring streams. After that 6-month period, when the water is removed from the mines, they can begin mining. then they have to keep pumping water out, and that would be at 1.9 to 5.6 CFS for the remainder of that time. And 1.9 is the maintenance level that they mentioned, but they do say that for various circumstances, like expanding the mine, that they would give themselves permission to increase the pumping and discharge to 5.6 CFS. Next. So what does that mean in terms of these creeks? 5.6 CFS doesn't seem like a lot if you're a kayaker, and yet for these creeks that are fairly small, it is a lot of water. So using their data adapted to the two areas that we work with, Wolf Creek Community Alliance, the Forest Reach and the Meadow Reach, I've created these charts. So in the forest, the existing summer flow is about 0.2 CFS. And during the initial watering, it would be about 29 times higher. And during maintenance water, 10 times higher or more, depending on how much they actually put in. During the winter, the existing flow of 1.5 would be much higher as well during that initial period, 5 or 2 times higher. So looked at this way, it seems like there's a very large difference, not a small amount of difference. Let's move on. This next set of graphs shows the same calculation at the Meadow Reach, which has a little bit more water to begin with, but you can still see very large differences. And this, for me, raises the question, when is a mine drainage channel still a creek? And I've been monitoring this creek for 17 years, and it's an important part of our project with Wolf Creek Community Alliance to preserve the health of these creeks. And so we are concerned about the volume of water and the possibility of water that is not of good quality and is toxic or dangerous to life in some sense. Let's move on. So Wolf Creek Community Alliance measures a number of water quality factors shown there: temperature, dissolved oxygen, pH, etc. And all these are important factors, and all these could be impacted by this mine water discharge. According to public comments submitted by Empire Mine State Historic Park, they see potential impacts and concerns in a similar way: increased heavy metals and turbidity, erosion, degradation of bank stability, alternation of groundwater supplies, impact on aquatic and avian populations. So these are the things that concern us about the dewatering process. Next. Well, many documents have been submitted by Rise Gold, and they assert that changes in hydrology will not significantly impact groundwater or wells or the South Fork. The hydrology report itself is 151 pages. And I just want to say that this is a complex issue. It's complex even for the people who are creating these reports. It's based in some part on estimates, and there are areas where there's limited data. We, as the people living in the headwaters, are subject to the non-compliance of a mine, to accidents, to failure. So I would say our role is to ask good questions and really work hard to better understand potential impacts. Next. So that was all introductory to the living creatures, the biology of this headwaters. And now we get to finally consider the plants and animals. And I'm going to look at the aquatic ecosystems here. What we do at Wolf Creek Community Alliance is we look closely at a group of creatures that is near the base of the food pyramid called Benthic macroinvertebrates. Benthic means bottom of the stream, and macro means large. Invertebrates means without a backbone. These are largely insects, larvae, but also mollusks and snails. And they're really good indicators of stream ecosystem health. We regularly test for the richness and abundance and diversity of these organisms. And they're a complex community. The bottom image shows the range of functions that they serve within that micro ecosystem there in the stream. There are grazers and shredders, collectors and predators. And they also have a seasonal life cycle dependent on stream topography and flow. And this again returns me to questions about volumes of water and alterations to the stream topography. Next. In the headwaters of the Wolf Creek watershed, we're seeing consistently high numbers, especially at the upstream sites for both Wolf Creek and South Fork. And the highest scores are coming from the forest reach of the South Fork. So we're seeing real good numbers, lots of diversity and complexity, and a healthy stream able to support complex, diverse ecosystem. And one of the other markers of that is we see rainbow trout in the stream, for example. Let's move on. So for these benthic macroinvertebrates, there are some potential impacts. If the water quality changed significantly, there could be mortality due to toxic discharges, changes in pH, et cetera. The populations could be disrupted due to changes in stream depth and velocity and loss of seasonal pattern of high and low flows. By the way, on the left bottom, that's a larval form of a stonefly, and up above, that's the adult. Next. For fish and amphibians, the impacts could cascade, and they're dependent on macroinvertebrates. They also are living a lot of the time in the water. For the salmon, where the salmon is, for the trout, a change in dissolved oxygen would be very much a problem. And for the California newt or the Sierra tree frog or the Ensatina salamander, we could see some population declines. Next. And there are even two species of concern. There's the Button's banana slug, imperiled, and it's been observed at the South Fork. And there's the foothill yellow-legged frog, which is a federal species of concern, and there's suitable habitat on the South Fork. Next. So that's the aquatic habitats and some of the creatures that might be impacted. With birds, it is much of the same thing. There's a diversity of habitats. There's a richness and abundance of species in the headwaters. There's more than 100 species observed. There's extensive research going on, people using eBird, Christmas bird counts. There's a beautiful breeding bird atlas, and there's a great program of bird banding actually on the South Fork Meadow. And this bird shown here is a wood duck in breeding plumage, and 7 wood ducks were recently seen in that pond at the Brunswick site. Next. So just to give a sense, I've shown some of the significant birds that are in our headwaters in stream riparian habitats. There's water ouzels, belted kingfishers, red-breasted sapsuckers. Next. In the forests, there are the black-headed grosbeak, which you perhaps hear singing so much in the spring, the pileated woodpeckers, and the Cooper's hawk. In grasslands, we see the California quail quite frequently, but maybe you haven't seen the California thrasher with its curved bill, or the beautiful lazuli bunting. And there are some California species of special concern that might be impacted. The California spotted owl that's been sighted at Empire Mine State Historic Park, which needs forest, as well as the olive-sided flycatcher, which has been sighted at the South Fork Meadow. Next. Other species of special concern, the willow flycatcher, the yellow-breasted chat, and the yellow warbler. All of these, all of those birds depend on willow habitat along the riparian edge, and they've all been banded in the South Fork Meadow. Okay, so overall potential impacts on birds: loss of habitat, loss of food, benthic macroinvertebrates, loss of habitat due to stream incision, and disruption of breeding habitat due to increased noise, which is another issue in itself, but a lot of research is being done and showing that birds are strongly impacted, particularly during breeding situations, by noise. So I've done my best to show you some of the potential impacts. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jean.
Jean, are you ready to do your part of the presentation now? You may be muted. I'm not sure, but there you are. Hi.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, thank you. Can you see me?
You can.
Okay, all right, then I'll keep going. I'm going to be talking about the plant communities and how they relate to the importance of the headwaters. Next. Not just weeds. This is a reaction to a review of the biological resources reports that have been submitted on behalf of Bryce Gold for the Centennial and Brunswick sites. While these reports describe 8 distinct native plant communities present at one or both sites, the implication seems to be that most of these plant communities are weed-ridden and degraded. As Gary noted, and I will show in more detail, nothing could be further from the truth. My presentation will explain the essential role of native plant communities, not just individual species, in maintaining healthy watersheds, demonstrate that native plant communities of the Centennial and Brunswick sites are intact and healthy at present, but will be drastically impacted by the mine project. Review vegetation maps of these 2 sites, as well as maps of species of concern and aquatic resources delineation maps, and then compare those current status maps with the project maps and descriptions. And finally, review the role of the native plant communities at these 2 sites in enabling the South Fork Wolf Creek watershed to provide critical ecosystem services. Next. Our watersheds and their headwaters must be preserved as whole ecological systems, as Gary was saying, or they cannot be healthy. It is not enough to protect individual protected species in isolation. Gary described many of the critical ecosystem services and benefits provided by healthy watersheds and their headwaters, including purifying and storing water, reducing erosion and flooding, improving air quality, and enriching the soil. And of course, increasing resilience in the face of climate change. But it is the native plant communities that are present at these sites: forest and chaparral, wetland meadows, and riparian corridors, that are the working parts of the headwaters landscape. They perform these services, the plants do, and they provide these benefits. This means that without a variety of thriving, intact native plant communities, each adapted to the characteristics of specific soil, weather, and location, the watershed cannot be healthy. The biological resources reports on Centennial and Brunswick sites identify 8 types of native plant communities and 128 distinct native plant species. At least another 11 species have been identified by resources such as iNaturalist. This means that these 2 sites, totaling over 180 acres, are home to a minimum of 139 native species. But the picture is even more complex. At least 82 of the native plant species have been identified on the Centennial site, of which 46 are found at Centennial, but not at Brunswick. This means these 2 sites, totaling over 180 acres, This means that these 2 sites are both diverse and unique, each having more distinct species than they have in common. For instance, there are, of those 139 species, 82 have been identified at Centennial site. 46 of those are found at Centennial, but not at Brunswick. Of the 86 species identified at Brunswick, 47 are found there, but not at Centennial. So, as I said, these are distinct species, very distinct sites having distinct species and more different species than they have in common. Just so I will identify some of the plant photos in here. All of the plant and flower photos in this presentation are plants that actually occur and have been identified at these sites. So, for instance, the picture with this slide is of the fairy bell. It's an understory plant that grows in the shade of the mature forests and is quite beautiful. Next. There's additional, can you back up? Okay, I'm sorry, I skipped. There are, as more evidence of the variety of the species, there on just these 2 species, there are 20, these 2 sites, there are 20 different species of trees, including pines and oaks, 3 species of pine, 3 species of oaks, big leaf maples, madrones, incense cedars, firs, willows, dogwoods, alders, hazelnuts, cottonwoods, and even McNabb cypress and California yew, both of which are very unusual species. There are also more than 20 species of shrubs, 2 each of manzanita, Oregon grape, coffeeberry, and there's a whole list here: spice bush, coyote bush, and so on and so forth. And finally, the rare pine hill flannel bush. Next. Thank you. Additional proof that the native plant communities of Centennial and Brunswick are intact and healthy is that there are 18 different species of perennial native grasses, bunch grasses, rushes, and sedges. And of course, the rushes and sedges are primarily in the wetlands, and there's quite a variety. There are 8 species of geophytes involving bulbs, irises, and so on and so forth. Wild onions, Brodea. There are several, and one of the Brodea is a species of concern. There are also several lily-related species, such as the Humboldt's lily, which is a plant of concern. Trillium, and I showed you the picture of the fairy bells. Also wild ginger, which is the top left photo on this slide. Others mentioned include the coffeeberry, which is the top right, and spice, which is the bottom right. One of the keys about these, having all these interesting and beautiful species, is that the wild lilies and orchids, and there are 5 native orchids on these 2 sites, require up to 10 years to mature and bloom, and they are found only in established, shady, moist forests with minimum disturbance. They are not found in degraded sites overrun by invasive plants. Next. More proof that the native plant communities at Centennial and Brunswick sites are intact and healthy. One of the things that was stressed in the reports was the amount of blackberry and non-native grasses and so on. But in fact, these are in the minority. There are only, there were 64 non-native species recorded compared with 139, which means that only a third of the plants are non-native, which is actually pretty good for these days. Invasive and non-native plants encroaching into woodlands and grasslands have been a big problem in the state for a long time. So the fact that there are still 18 species of native perennial grasses, rushes, and sedges is great, and that there are only 11 species of non-native grasses that are characterized as at all invasive is also good. It means that there is a good chance that these habitats will continue to be healthy if we don't have them overrun by the mine. And I point out also that there are 139 of the native species of trees, et cetera, but only 23 non-native species at all total are characterized as moderately or highly invasive, which also is a good proportion in this circumstance. Clearly, the native species far predominate at both sites, not only in the number of species, but by sheer plant mass, because when you're looking at the natives, many of them are mature trees up to 100 feet tall, and most of the non-natives are small, perennials, annuals, and so there's no question, even in just sheer plant mass, we're talking many more natives and much more of a native plant community than non-natives. Next. So I wanted to show you, all of these maps are taken from the biological resources reports that were submitted on behalf of Rise Gold. And this first map shows the map of the plant communities of the Centennial site, which is 56.41 acres and has 20 acres of montane riparian, which is that dark green on the map. Yes, and another 16 acres are the mixed chaparral, which is that orange at the bottom. Annual grasslands is the light green near the top, and wet meadow, montane hardwood conifer is that blue area right in the middle, and then it goes down from there. So keeping this in mind, let's look at what is planned for this site. Next. So this is the map of what is planned. And I have to admit, when looking at this, I was confused because you see in the report, it says that only 29 acres of the Centennial site will be impacted by the engineered fill, which means, doing the math, that 27 plus acres will not be buried. And yet, when you look at this graphic, that fill seems to be covering up to 85% or more of the site. And just looking at the dotted line around the edge and where that fill is in proportion. So, for instance, it'll cover, the fill will cover 2/3, just by the acreage, it will cover 2/3 of the mixed chaparral, half of the montane riparian community, and 1/3 of the wet meadow complex. Next. At the Centennial site, there are 3 plant species of concern. I mentioned earlier the Sierra Brodea and the Humboldt's lily. Both are listed by CNPS, which is not, CNPS ranking is not reflected on its own in federal rankings, but they are reflected in state rankings of plants of concern. The Pine Hill flannelbush is federally recognized as an endangered plant. Next. So the first map here of the listed plants shows graphically with little pink and blue triangles the location of the Sierra Brodea and Humboldt lilies. There's only one pocket that's been identified on the Centennial site of the Humboldt lilies, which is that turquoise triangle right there. And then there are quite a few locations that have been identified of Sierra Brodea, the pink triangles. And you'll see that if you keep in mind the map that was done before, almost all of those pink triangles, and certainly the entire turquoise triangle, are going to be impacted by that fill. The remediation listed in the report about plants of concern is that they will dig these up and move them to another area of suitable habitat. Next. There was a separate report on the Pine Hill Flannel Bush, including a management plan for how they were going to deal with it. Most of the Pine Hill Flannel Bush are included along the edge of that prior map, as you can see, with the idea that they would be avoided by the fill that they're going to put there. But there are some that are a couple plants that are at least 4, I think, that are within the area that the fill will be placed, and there are several more along that bottom edge that will be right up against the 90-foot slope that will have the engineered fill. And they may very well be impacted negatively by being in that location, because it will change their habitat quite a bit to be on the edge of that. I would point out that it is apparently the case that engineered fill, that the drawing that was done before, is going to be 44 acres at the bottom and 36 or so at the top. And that top part is what's going to be graded and packed down so that eventually they will be building at the top of this 90-foot man-made plateau of engineered fill. I guess buildings, I don't know whether they're planning commercial or industrial, but that's the eventual plan. So clearly there isn't going to be, well, we'll move on to the next slide. This is a aquatic resources delineation map for the Centennial site. And I want to point out that there is a lot going on this site in terms of aquatic resources. There's marsh, which is the green and white sort of mottled color. The meadow is the solid green, and the riparian is the stripy green. And thank you. And what was most confusing to me in this impact assessment technical memo that was prepared for Rise Gold and submitted is that they said that the proposed project will have no impact on the mapped wetlands within the Centennial Industrial Site, given that any fill or dredge of mapped wetlands within the site will occur as part of the site mediation of the toxics that will be approved by the DRSC prior to the development of the Idaho Maryland mine project. But that assumes apparently that there will be no wetlands left, that the cleanup itself will destroy all of the wetlands and meadows and marshes. And that doesn't make sense, that there cannot be a separate evaluation of whether and what impacts the putting all that fill there will have. So that's a question that I have. Next. As for the Brunswick site, there are, which is 129 acres, including the East Bennett Road right-of-way, has in the lower portion and to the left, you can see there's a very large area of forest. It's almost 36 acres of Sierra and mixed conifer. It's mature trees. This is where you find a lot of the orchids and trilliums and ginger and other plants that are indicators of healthy plant communities. There is a significant amount of developed property, which is over 40, almost 47 acres, or more than 47 acres, is that gray and white section. And then the dark blue is the montane hardwood conifer, which is along the edge. And that is essentially going to be not disturbed. And same with the grasslands, which is light blue. But I want to draw your attention to the, did I say light blue? I meant light green. I was jumping ahead. I want to draw your attention to the light blue spot, which is where the pond is. And all around, you see sort of a small area of darker blue in the middle, but around that, there is a very healthy and thriving willow community that has at least 5 species of willows, has tules, and this is the kind of habitat for birds that 3 of which are species of concern that Gary mentioned. This is exactly habitat, but when you look at what's going to be there after, right now it's a 7.28 acre man-made pond, which, as Gary pointed out, also is home to some wood ducks and other birds. That whole thing will be gone, including all the vegetation, and it will be turned into a holding pond for water that is being treated. There will be a new stormwater pond down below that, between that light blue section and the gray part that's already disturbed. Right in there, yeah. So the point is that, again, a massive amount of habitat is going to be lost, and particularly there will be a loss of approximately half of that green forest area in the bottom. And yet they're only going to be using 2/3 of the developed and disturbed property and leaving some of that untouched. Next. So again, here's a map showing the planned disturbance. There's surface area use, which is indicated by the lime green. There's the dark blue, which is the water treatment pond. The planned stormwater detention pond, you can see as a red line down between the water treatment pond and the still area, which is the beige, which again is 90 feet deep, like the one on Centennial. And they estimate the maximum area impact is 60 of 129 acres. Next. So I think I mentioned the thing about the disturbed and developed. They're only using about a little over 2/3. The mixed conifer, they're doing about half of it, taking about half of that out, all of man-made pond, and the rest are fairly limited impacts. Next. So in conclusion, this proposed mine could destroy intact native plant communities that have amazingly recovered from all the disturbance that was there for over 140 years of mining and industrial use. It can or could extirpate rare and species of great value from our area. It could endanger water quality. It could degrade stream and upland habitat. It could impact bird population. It could reduce overall watershed resiliency and threaten our sense of community. Next. But if we remember that the Headwaters is a living whole, that it is not separate from us, that what happens to the Headwaters affects us all, our health, our environment, our economy, our future, we realize it's up to us to preserve it, and that's what we hope to do. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you very much, Jean and Gary, for that presentation. That's a lot of information you just gave us. My head is reeling a bit. but it was sensational. The amount, I came away, just the two things that impressed me most are just how much biodiversity is along the Wolf Creek riparian corridors. I walk up there quite a lot, but I just didn't really fully understand how much is there. Partly because I can't go on some of the parts of land, but I was wondering, I wanted to just sort of ask both Gary and Jean. So Gary, you've been monitoring Wolf Creek for 17 years, and Jean, it sounds like you've had the opportunities to walk around these areas a bit. I was just curious if you could tell us just about your experiences, like what, in this, you get this very methodical presentation about the types of species, et cetera, but can you just tell us about the experience of this area for those of us who haven't spent that much time along Wolf Creek?
A lot of the comparisons I was making and talking about come from the plant list and the species list and the maps and so on. So I have been able to go to a portion from neighbors and walk around. I was stunned by the beauty of the forest area. That area that where about half of it's going to be lost to the fill piles. And I was also, it's just, it is a mature forest that it's managed to recover, which is a real testament to the resiliency of these California native plant communities. But, they were able to do this because they were left alone for quite a while, and they weren't paved over, and they weren't completely dug up. And so they had the opportunity to do that, but with a change, so it's not just a matter of, oh, well, they recovered once, they can do it again. It's with the changes that they're proposing, what they're going to be doing, it won't be the same. And it's a real loss. It will be a real loss if that happens, because this is a beautiful country. And I had no idea about the range of species before I got there. Just walking through part of it, I was able to identify 50 different species of native plants.
Yeah. Well, so CEQA, the Environmental Quality Act, California Environmental Quality Act, basically says that you need to protect endangered species, riparian environments, all of which it sounds like exist in this area, in the areas where Rise Gold wants to dump their material from the mine. How can Rise Gold just cover up over wetlands, for example? Is that allowed? How can they do that?
Well, I'm not an expert in this area, but I was struck by the idea that they don't even have to address the issue of covering over those wetlands at the Centennial site, because it's all going to be resolved by the toxic cleanup.
Okay.
And so they didn't even address that issue they said, we don't need to worry about that because that's all going to be resolved before. And apparently the assumption is that the cleanup is going to require them to destroy all of the current wetland features.
Gary?
I wanted to comment on that as well.
Sure.
That I think one of the problems we face as a community of concerned people is that the existing Centennial site has known toxicity, and yet the solution for that is completely separated from this mine proposal we're looking at. And so it really places us at jeopardy, as a community. How is that toxic site going to be cleaned up? Will it be cleaned up adequately? It's not even part of the CEQA process for this project because it's a separate issue, and some of the panelists here can speak to that with more detail. But just as someone who's lived here for 17 years, been a monitor for 17 years, lived here for 21 years, who's taken my daughter down to the South Fork and all around here, it's concerning that we're dealing with these things in parts and pieces. Just as we said that we have to look at the watershed and ecosystems as a whole, we need to look at impacts as a whole and not just in little parts. That's what I want to say about it.
Thanks. Anybody else on the panel want to address this question or these ideas? Ralph, do you have any input on this?
I think Gary and Jean make an excellent point. I can't really get at that. It's just that when you look at the whole project and you look at the rich habitat that's there, you know, everyone seems to be really focused in the mine community of whether it hits the threshold of whether it's a significant impact or not, which triggers the CEQA ruling. That means that the county has to do certain things before the project could be approved. But the reality is that the impacts, even if they're not listed as significant on an individual basis, collectively, the collective impacts of this project are significant. And, you know, it's a difficult task in the CEQA realm to establish that, but it's a really easy task in the realm of reality to recognize that. I think that it's a precious resource and that we should do what we can to protect it, especially since it's so close to town and it somehow managed to survive all the abuse that's been put upon it.
There was a question about apparently, well, when the last application to reoperate the Idaho Maryland mine was proposed around 2008 or so, they were going to dump all the water that had to be pumped out of the mine. They were proposing to pump it into the larger Wolf Creek. The Rise Gold proposal is planning to dump the water directly into the South Fork. Why is that? Why did they sort of decide to flood a tributary as opposed to pump it to the main branch? Because when I walk up Idaho Maryland Road in the wintertime and it's a strong storm event, I mean that creek is right at the road. So I guess my question is also can the South Fork of the Wolf Creek handle the amount of water that Rise Gold is proposing? I looked at Gary's slides and it looked like in the summertime a tenfold, but even in the wintertime, when there are storm winds, they're adding a lot of water, like orders of water to this creek. I'm sorry, I'm kind of thinking out loud here, but two questions I have is like, can the riparian biology of the area handle that? And are we concerned about flooding? I mean, is this an issue?
I guess
so. Go ahead, Gary.
Well, again, a lot of this, 2 points. A lot of this from the application perspective is contained in the hydrology report and the geomorphic study of the South Fork. This is really a complex realm of that a hydrologist is most comfortable with. And there's some good study that has been done, but there's a lot of gaps. And I think it's really an open question. I don't think everything has been addressed in those studies. And the other point would be that going to that creek almost every month for 17 years and going down to it other times because I can walk to it from my house. I see the changes that creek. I see the seasonality of it. At a certain month, one thing is flowering. At a certain month, the stream is just covered with maple leaves or whatever. There's a lot of constant seasonal change in that stream. And my gut feeling about it is that to put a volume of water that's orders, well, not orders of magnitude, but is multiples of its normal value. Normal volume is not going to help that system. It's going to change it quite significantly. In terms of storm downstream, I don't think we need to worry too much. But again, I'm not an expert to say, but they have a retention pond for storm events, and actually they suggest that the storm level in the stream will be less than normal because they're storing so much water in the retention pond. But all this engineering doesn't give me any more confidence about the overall health and ecological functioning of the stream. Mm-hmm. Ralph, you wanted to add or point out some other things?
Well, as to the original question, when MGold submitted their first draft EIR on the project, they were planning on dewatering into the South Fork Wolf Creek. But then once they got through doing some technical studies and they got feedback from different agencies and at our encouragement as well as an organization under CLAIM, Citizens Looking at Impacts of Mining back then, they decided to go ahead and dewater into the main stem of Wolf Creek. I think that was a wise decision because the main stem has a much higher flow. The habitat, the stream banks and the riparian zone can better handle that because of this is a small amount to a large stream rather than a large amount to a small stream. So I was surprised that on their initial application, Rise Gold has gone back to the South Fork Wolf Creek and done a bunch of studies. And I would hope that they would finally decide that it makes more sense to dewater into the main stem as well. I mean, they have to put a water line on East Bennett, at least to supply water to the houses there because their wells may be impacted. And so while they're digging up the street, they can run a water line over and across and do it. So we'll see what happens. It might be the same thing happened last time. They start out with a draft and then they have to redo their plans.
Hey, Gary. Benjamin Mossman, the CEO of Rice Gold, didn't list arsenic as being in the water, but I believe you did. Why do you, and why didn't Mossman?
Well, I don't have a chance to talk with Mr. Mossman right now, so I'm not sure what the reference is. I'm referring to the hydrological report. Mm-hmm. We could go back and look. I referenced it. I think it was page 40 something. And the company that was doing water quality testing for heavy metals and other minerals, elements in the water, they tested in 2 locations and they put their results on a table. And one location is the New Brunswick mine. And when they lowered their instruments down New Brunswick mine, they tested at certain depths and they recorded the amounts. And it's true, looking at their charts at least, that within the New Brunswick mine shaft, there was low levels of arsenic. So perhaps Mr. Mossman is referring to the New Brunswick mine shaft, but I'm referring to what was also there in the hydrological report, which is the 4 areas that have drainage into the main stem of Wolf Creek. And it's clearly stated, it's shown on maps, these 4 drainage points. It's a little confusing with one of the 4, but they tested these 4, and that's where the very high arsenic was recorded. And you could say, well, that's not necessarily going to have anything to do with the mine water, but it's all connected underground. And it's a matter of very complex science and guessing and estimating and concluding. If you read the hydrological report, they're making a lot of conclusions. They say, based on this, we think it has to be that. And so I think that remains a question for me. arsenic in high levels is coming out of the drains from deep in the mine somewhere. And exactly what that means for our water quality, I don't know, but I want to make sure that it's a question so that it's addressed, because arsenic is not something we want in our water. And I'd be happy to talk with Mr. Mossman about it. I don't know, but I'm just referring to one of the reports that was submitted.
Yeah, thank you. I've read Rise Gold's stuff, and they've stated that they are, not concerned about the water being pumped out of the mine because it will be treated. And does that ensure that the water coming down into the creek will be okay for the creatures that are along the watershed there? Or, how do we know? And is there any monitoring that's going to happen to make sure that the water that is coming down the creek, if the mine is reoperated, will in fact be healthy, be safe? How does that work?
Those are big questions.
Just not for you, Gary, but anybody who might have some thoughts. But go ahead, Gary, if you've got some ideas.
Well, I think there's a lot of regulatory process involved. If you look at the documents, you see that there are a lot of regulations that that any application has to fulfill. But in my understanding and experience of it, once permits have been given for operation, it's very difficult to stop those operations. Also, monitoring is not something that's typically done very well. I, at the very least, would like to see a very robust system of monitoring, and I would like the community to have the ability, the city or the county or whatever, but very clear that that if there is a problem, that the mine would immediately cease operation. Now, there's a lot of examples where that doesn't happen because these are businesses and they don't want to stop operating.
Sure.
So I think it's a real open question for me, but I'm not assured by the mere fact that a company promises to follow regulations, and I don't see the robust system of monitoring or the consequences that would stop something that was a problem.
Okay, good. Thank you. I'm going to some questions from some of the attendees in the webinar tonight. Paul Stackhouse asks, according to the National Wildlife Federation, hard rock mining industry is the single largest source of toxic waste and one of the most destructive industries in the country. If that is true, why is Rise Gold asked to merely comply with secondary drinking water protection and not held to the higher standards of the primary water protection?
I could answer that one. The standard is to remove the iron and manganese from the water, and they should remove other metals if they discover them, such as arsenic or other contaminants. But that water is being then dumped into the creek. To treat it to primary drinking water standards would involve more testing and require testing for bacteria and such, and there's a whole lot of regulatory hurdles, and there would be no real benefit to that since it'd be dumped into the creek, and so it would have to be re-treated again downstream. So that would be one reason. The other reason is that, in terms of a water source, the mine is not actually producing water or adding water. They're pumping water out of the ground, out of the mine, which came from surface water and from groundwater. And after the initial dewatering, all the water that they consume will actually reduce the total amount of water going downstream. they will be consuming 123,000 gallons of water. So for them to start treating water as drinking water, it wouldn't really solve any problems. It's not like, oh, we've got this artesian well. A mine and all their equipment, no matter how technically advanced they are, can neither create nor destroy fundamental water. They can only really basically pollute it or treat it. So that'd be why, I think.
Yeah. James Lohr asked, is the drought addressed in the SECO report? Do we know this?
No.
No.
It's not.
In the hydrological report or the geomorphic study of the South Fork, drought is not addressed. There is some discussion of well levels over time. But again, I think there's a lot more data that needs to be gathered. And certainly in a drought or mega drought, as we are in now, like we just monitored the South Fork, the Wolf Creek last Saturday, and the water is very low. It's still flowing fine, but it's very low. And you see the effects of that in some of the water quality measurements. It seems obvious to me that dry years, drought years are closely connected with the overall hydrology of this headwaters where we live. And to disregard that seems dangerous.
Yeah. I think that Josie Crawford wants to make a comment. Josie, were you able to unmute yourself?
Yes, I think.
Oh, good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So I just wanted to say that Wolf Creek Community Alliance fully intends to monitor the creek very closely, as soon as they start operation. And it's great that we have all this background data some baseline data, that is, to judge it against. And when we see any changes in pH levels, if it becomes more acidic, if the temperature changes, we'll be on it. But, will we have much recourse when we see those changes? We can report them, and sometimes that will trigger an investigation. But yeah, we don't know yet how much they're going to be able to monitor. One thing we would like to be able to do is to test for metals very regularly, but that is extremely expensive to do. So, so we won't be able to do it probably as often as we'd like to, unless we can get some grants or major donor that wants to support that kind of thing.
Okay. If anyone has any other questions they'd like to ask the panelists, please put them in the Q&A. Otherwise, we will kind of end up the discussion here. And I'd like to invite Tracy to talk to us a little bit about actions that we can take to make our voices heard and help influence decision makers. Go ahead, Tracy.
Thank you, Greg. There is one more question I just saw come in from Erin Tarr.
Okay.
I could direct that to someone because I want to know the answer actually. Do you know if NID will have to approve the project? Who wants to take that one? Is that Ralph? Yeah.
Well, not in the sense that they would have to approve the project, but and they would have to approve supplying water to the East Bennett neighborhood at the very least, and probably more neighborhoods. There's some question as to whether that approval is already in the works or not. So that's something we have to find out about. So it's one of the many agencies that if they say no, it would cause this project to come to a halt probably.
Great, thank you. So Tracy, you want to talk to us a little bit about what you've been up to and what CA has been doing and how we can help people think about this and take action?
Sure, I would love to. It's my favorite topic. Thanks everyone for attending tonight. I've seen many names that are familiar and many that are new. So, but I have some new information for everyone tonight. So if you take a look, we have a long list of things you can do. And if you go to our website, there's an action kit and you can learn more about more that you can do and how to involve others. But let's focus on what we're doing and why. Bottom line here is that this decision is made by the County Board of Supervisors. And as many folks know, we are still awaiting the draft environmental impact report. So until we get there, right now, what we're doing is working to build our ranks to make this project visible in the community. And I think we're getting there. I hope people tonight will agree on that. And there's a lot going on. You see lawn signs going up. We are very visible at the Board of Supervisors. We know that supervisors are getting letters. The Grass Valley City Council are getting letters. So that's wonderful. What we want to do for folks who aren't on our newsletter list or haven't taken action, please go tonight and go to our website. It's www.minewatchnc.org. And first thing off, sign the petition. Then if you're on social media, go sign up for Facebook, join our Facebook community and get involved there. You can get a lawn sign. The first thing we're going to ask folks to do after signing a petition is to comment at the supervisor meeting. Write a letter to your supervisor and let them know your position. Start a conversation with your supervisor. So there's a long list of things to do. Now, if you come to all of our monthly meetings, you're thinking, okay, the fourth Thursday, I'm going to be back here, or the last Thursday of the month, I'm going to be back here. We're going to do something different in July. We want to translate all of our concern into action. So the last Thursday of July, we're going to have a big day of tabling. We want you to get involved. I know there are a lot of folks that are setting up tables. Risa Huck, who is on this call tonight. Thank you, Risa. She's setting up tables at SPD. We're going to be in many places and we need you there too. You don't have to know all the information. Just come sit at a table with 2 or 3 other people and get a petition signed. You'll learn as you're sitting there and hearing answers to questions. So finally, the last thing I want to wrap on is you can see the bottom is donate. You see lawn signs, you see a lot of things that are happening, and it's your financial resources, your financial support that gives us the resources to do that. One of the questions tonight was, is there a law firm involved? And yes, there is. And that, of course, is not free. So CEA has retained Shoup, Mahaly, and Weinberger, and we need your support to have them on retainer. So go to the website, there's a donate button, sign the petition, make a comment to your supervisor, join our Facebook community, and I hope to see you at a table 1 month from today. Thanks, everyone.
So with that, I think that's all of it for this evening. Thank you all panelists. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Jean, for coming tonight and just giving us excellent information. Thank you, Ralph and Josie and Tracy and everyone for being the panelists tonight. And we look forward to seeing everybody at tables in July. And till the next time. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.
Oh, and Stephanie, I'm sorry. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you, Stephanie.